got anything about these drums?
I do, actually. I do have something. Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Okay. I think that studies have actually shown, if you look at the data, if you will, if you're English, the data that is out there, when it comes to those drums, when they come in, the song is scientifically exponentially proven to be better with the drums than without the drums.
Well, it's definitely been tested and repeated and
has.
shown as true.
Yeah. I mean, name one really awesome instrumental band that doesn't have drums. You can't.
I'm trying really hard though.
I know you are.
Like,
You
I'm
can't.
going through my head.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
What's the song?
Yeah. Name one band just without drums. Band.
That's the reason I just Simon and Garfunkel. But they have drums. They're just playing them.
Well, I mean, look, drums are so important that even the Avett brothers didn't even have a drummer, and they still played the drums.
Yeah.
That's how important they were.
Well, it's like they're brothers. There's two of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they still find a way to put a full band out
That's
there.
right. So put the drums, a kick, and a snare in there. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
scientifically proven.
what is that song? Is that
Studies
my heart
have
is a
shown.
kick drum? Is
Yeah.
that the lyric in that song? My heart is a kick
You know what else is, I wonder, scientifically proven? How many people drop off after the first 16 seconds of every one of our podcasts?
Most people only listen for the drum joke.
Because they hear the drum joke and they're like,
And then
I
they're like,
forget
all right,
this.
All right, I'm done. No, I
Remember,
feel,
we are the doorway to apologetics.
That's right.
Not apologetics.
honestly, I feel like it's more they hear the drum joke and they go, well, they're not topping this.
Going on a high note here.
That's right. Going on a hi-hat.
We should do for our 2-year anniversary, we should do a compilation video of every drum joke ever made.
So, I want to do that.
Oh, yeah.
The reason why I haven't is because it's a lot of work.
It's a ton of them. I know.
A lot of work.
I know.
I need to hire somebody for no money to just do it for me.
Is there anybody out there who wants to join,
if anybody
join
wants
the
to,
pod-
anybody wants to do that,
podcast group here? Yeah.
that's right. You'll be our new favorite person.
Clearly, we've already commandeered 98 Dynamics Studio, so
That's right.
I mean, we're here now. Yeah.
They don't do a lot of work. Maybe they have time to do.
Maybe we could put them, rope them into some kind of. They work with the internets.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. They run the internet.
I think they run our MySpace account actually.
Yeah, I saw Al Gore come through here the other day.
That's right.
Hey, so let's talk about an actual topic.
Okay.
Let's get started.
Let's talk about some real science.
Let's talk about some science.
Okay, let's talk about some real science.
Science, because science, Brandon. Science. I hate that. I hate it when people say that, because science. It's like, do you know what you're saying?
No.
I think we've talked about this from the beginning.
Right.
As a society, we have lost the definition of every word.
Right.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah. We just throw things out and try to make them fit our meaning without a true understanding of what we're talking about.
We're not even sure if they're words.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That video I showed you, manipulation. That's not a word. Sounds like a word, but it is.
What are birds? We'll never know. That was great. Just look around.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about science.
Right.
We're going to specifically, though, talk about, is science compatible with faith?
Right.
Right? Because there are people who are going to tell you that they're not. That, well, you have faith, but I have science. Right. So they say that science and faith are at odds with each other. So one, the science is intellectual, and the other, faith, is about blind trust in something you can't prove. Right. So it's like, well, that's belief and this is fact. Right. Or that's feeling and this is fact. Right. And these facts don't care about your feelings.
Yes. Ben Shapiro. All right, buddy. I see you over there. Yeah. I see. Yeah.
So why don't we start like we do most of these podcasts?
Right.
Let's look for some definitions.
Let's
of
define the word.
science.
Yeah. I noticed this round you did not go with a Wikipedia definition.
No. I stuck with Oxford. I stayed because we can't validate Wikipedia's methods, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They're not scientific.
They're not scientific.
No, yeah.
Okay, but Oxford, who obviously does everything scientifically,
Right. They're English.
within reason, I guess. Can you do English scientifically? They say that science is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple key words from that definition.
Good definition. Yeah.
Physical and natural. right? So what we're talking about really when we talk about science, we're really talking about physical science,
right,
or natural science,
right,
right? Like I remember that was like my freshman year of high school. I was in physical science, right?
Right.
When people talk about science, this is usually what they're referencing.
100%
is physical science specifically, right?
Right.
Not the quote unquote sciences, which all have different methodologies.
Which I was going to say is I think it's a really important distinguishing thing to make. Like that's a 20th century thing.
Yeah,
I'd say really. I was going to say 21st, but it's really 20th century. It really comes around like Age of Enlightenment. That whole area. So you could even say 19th century technically, but like that whole era discredits what was considered to be many lines of science, and by that I mean like for a very long time. In fact, I took a class, and one of the classes, I can't remember who said it, but someone talked about weaker sciences or lesser sciences. And this comes around in this era of the Enlightenment. That is, like, there were sciences. So, like, reason, philosophy was a science. Like, to be a philosopher and to be, because it was rooted in the grounds of logic and reason. Not like, continental philosophy today is more so like feelings and, but back in the day, it was like, I need to create a logical argument, A plus B equals C, therefore C minus B equals A. It's almost mathematic. Like that's how logic and math were hand in hand. But then they began to see like philosophy as a lesser science because it was not quote unquote observing the natural world.
Could be put in a beaker and tested.
Exactly.
It was more in the realm of consciousness. It's in thought.
Exactly right. And so once reason became belittled, so did theology. Because for a long time, theology was considered the spiritual side of science. Like there were, just look throughout history. Like Christianity is not the only ideas of spirituality, theology. Like there's a lot of theology out there, and for many centuries, like that was a line of thought that was seen to be as like God is a science. There is a science behind it, and so. But then suddenly it all kind of got grouped into physical.
It's almost like you would say there's a physics to faith.
There is a physics to faith, 100%. And this is finally the podcast where the physics are going to come in, very briefly,
just for a little bit.
For a little bit.
It's a teaser. Right. Okay, so. I think as we continue to break this down with this definition, so we see like what you're really trying to do with science is get answers as to what something is through observation, experimentation, testing it, and doing it over and over again to try to create consistency so that you can say this is,
why did the apple fall from the tree? Like that's the basic idea. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Isaac Newton, gravity. Right.
Gravity. Exactly.
Okay. So if our original claim or original concern is that faith and science are at odds with each other, I think it's important for us to revisit our conversation about faith.
100%.
So you and I did an episode where we talked about faith. Right. And so when we did, some of the things that we came up with, and I do recommend you go back and listen to that podcast at some point, we said that faith isn't blind.
No.
Right? It's belief in an outcome based on experiences and observations.
100%.
It is trust.
Right.
It's basically to say that something proves itself faithful. The more you, as something proves itself faithful, the more you will have faith in it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Doesn't this sound so much like what we just talked about with this scientific method or this conversation about observing, testing, and seeing what the outcomes are?
I think the one you just used, and not to get too far deep into our notes already, but like the idea of gravity is in and of itself a faith-based statement. Like we cannot see it. No, there's no like, there's no goggles we can put on to see. Like, but yet we trust in gravity. Like if I were to drop my phone or drop anything, I would trust that it would drop down. And we've also proven that gravity's rate is different on the moon, so there is a math to it. There's a science, but there is also a faith side of it that we call it gravity. We don't know what it is. Like, and this is a theory that literally back in the day, the philosophers kind of teased out just to show how much faith is involved in it. We can't prove it, but what if there were a small piece of string tied to every object in the whole world that creates the drop? And what if, this is stupid, but what if God is holding all those strings and but that's the idea. Is like, so you're saying my faith in something that is unseen is less confounded than your faith in something that's unseen, even though I can replicate it just like you can replicate it.
Well, I think the difference here, I think what somebody will tell you is like, okay, yeah, I can't see gravity itself with my naked eye. I can't see wind itself with my naked eye.
Right.
I can see the effects of it. I can observe its effects and its properties and how it functions, right?
Right.
The mistake they make is to say that we can't do that with God.
100%.
Right? So there is a force there that is unseen but can be observed.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And it can be put to the test.
I think even like if you want to talk statistically speaking, like just looking at, we've talked about this, like just looking at the statistics of faith, like people with faith, the quality of life with faith, things like that. I think like there are, from a scientific, there are provable health things that you could say are, and I don't want to get too much like into the weeds there, but just to say like there are, beyond just the miraculous, which still exists today, there are even easy, tangible things that we can say that show the existence of God. And not only that, we're going to talk about this today, like Scripture is a great source to support what science already says.
Yeah. Well, just go back to the book. Just go to the book of Leviticus, which most atheists would hate to do.
Sure. Yeah.
But just read through some of the things that they talk about when they talk about the civil and ceremonial laws.
100%.
Washing your hands.
Right.
The importance of running water.
Right.
How life is in the blood.
Right.
About quarantining.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right. During an age in which that stuff wasn't understood.
Right.
Scientifically.
Right.
But God was commanding that his people adhere to those things.
Right.
Before it was obvious or clear. Right. So like
even just in the foods they eat.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there were foods that were more susceptible to disease.
Yeah.
I mean, and like that's just,
yeah.
Why? We talked about that last, like apologetics, like they asked the question why. Like science asked the question why. Right. Well, as we're going to get into this, like, and I think that's really funny, is one of the number one tenets of science is having a reason.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I feel like in today's day and age, science is about how.
Sure.
Right. That's how it really gets framed. It never really approaches the why.
Right.
Right. And it almost insinuates that the why is not important.
Right. Right. Exactly right. Sure.
Which really gives you almost a meaningless existence. So
it gets really nihilist very quick. Yes.
Yeah. So as we were discussing, there is a big overlap with science. Now, is science faith? I don't know that I would say science is faith, but I would say there are elements of faith in science and elements of science in faith.
100%.
Right?
Yes.
They absolutely overlap.
Right.
They operate on similar principles. And sometimes they, what's interesting though is sometimes science seems to be blind science, right? So
100%.
This is something we talk about. We'll accuse you of blind faith.
Right.
Right. Which, excuse me, the existence of that statement is evidence that faith isn't blind.
Right.
The fact that you have to qualify it with the word blind is to say you have faith without evidence. But if I have evidence, then I just have faith.
Right.
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 So science often will start with the presupposition that they haven't proven.
Right.
They have faith or they have a belief that what they believe will be proven over time.
For sure.
Right. So you end up with blind science.
Right.
Right. Let me give you some examples. These are big words, so get Wikipedia ready. Methodological naturalism.
Yep.
And ontological naturalism. Ontological naturalism is also known as metaphysical naturalism.
Yep.
So let me define these for you, tell you what they are. Methodological naturalism is the philosophical doctrine of methodological naturalism holds that for any study of the world to qualify as scientific, it cannot revert to God's creative activity or any sort of divine activity.
Right.
And the ontological or metaphysical naturalism, this is a philosophical worldview which holds that there is nothing but natural elements, principles, and relations of the kind studied by the natural science.
Right.
So you're kind of got two sides of the same coin here, which is to say one claims that you shouldn't look at supernatural explanations to explain the natural, and the other states that there are no supernatural explanations to even look at because they don't exist.
Right, right.
There is nothing but what is natural.
Right.
Which really we're now in the vein of materialism.
Right, 100%.
Right? Now, what's the first word I used to describe these?
These two?
Do you remember what the first word I used when I read the definitions?
Philosophical.
Philosophical.
Right.
right? I think this is really important to remember. Science is built on philosophy.
100%.
It's built on the conscious.
Right.
It's not built on natural principles.
Right.
You cannot perform natural science without unnatural means.
100%.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah.
Right. So both of these are philosophical worldviews. Philosophy is not a natural science. And these worldviews are presuppositions that eliminate a supernatural conclusion
Right.
before you even begin working.
Right.
Okay. So this means that you must first have a belief that your evidence can only lead in one direction. And
which in itself is not scientific.
It's not.
From a scientific method, right? So I think, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that, but like the scientific method is the standard in which all science was created.
Right.
Like, or quote, what is science? How do we do science? And what's really interesting is the scientific method does not cross any options out.
Right.
Every explanation is on the table.
Right.
Only one is true. That's what science will say. Now, science will get real, especially in the world in which we live today, which is, like you said, really nihilist. Like, science will say, well, what is truth? But I think even your hardcore real deal scientists will say, like, we can figure out and say, like, that's a fact.
Yeah. Well, this is a, I could see a Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, well, what is truth?
Right.
Because he likes to be a populist. He likes to be on the side of popular opinion.
Right. Sure.
But if I told him that his understanding of the stars
right.
was either non-important,
right,
or not truth, or not
right.
my truth.
Right.
Well, you could say the stars are doing this, but that's not my truth. He
right.
would think I was crazy.
Right, 100%.
Right?
Right.
Like, he believes in an absolute truth when it comes to his field.
Right.
But once you get outside of his field and we start talking about things like faith, or even like with him, it's even stuff like biology and gender.
Sure.
He no longer really holds to a scientific view on those things.
Right.
He holds to a popular opinion view.
Right. I think that's important for us to not just for Neil, but like just for everybody to understand, like, that's a red flag, right?
Yeah.
So when you have science that's not even operating under the fields of science, which are that there is every explanation, like, like, this sounds terrible, but this is like, I could say that I believe that my hypothesis for gravity is not there's a force in which pulling everything, but that there is a little man with a string and he pulls all my stuff. Like, that sounds crazy, but science would say, hey, test it out. You know what I mean? Like, that is unapologetic true science.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying that to say it sounds crazy, but that's
how it works.
That's how it works.
Right. It has to be open to all possibilities.
So if you're open to all possibilities, crazy is not a content for you to cut it out. You know what I mean? Like, it's still science. It might be wrong.
Yeah.
But that's where. But so I bring all that up just to say, like, from the modern day perspective of whether methodological or ontological, like, both of them have already cut out a large part of what science even claims to do, which is truth.
Yeah.
We've already said, well, it's truth as long as it's the truth that we adhere to.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
It can't consist of God, or God doesn't exist.
Right.
So you've just already cut out an option.
Can you prove God with science if you start with the presupposition that God doesn't exist?
100%.
Right. You can't. You say, well, or can you prove that supernatural doesn't exist if you start with the presupposition
supernatural,
that there is no supernatural?
Right. 100%.
So, like, this is where I think atheists get it wrong. They think I have no bias because I have no deity.
Right.
Right. So I have no leaning towards that.
Right.
They fail to see they're leaning towards.
And this is where blind science begins to come in, right? Because blind science will say, well, we don't know, or we haven't seen it yet, but if we give it more time, we'll see, and so now you have a faith that is now turning into faith, right? Yeah. Which is, I will believe in this in spite of said evidence,
and I like to refer to that as the science of the gaps.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. Which is the thing that gets levied against Christians, right? Oh, you say that God did this because you can't explain it. Well, you say that evolution did this because you.
Right, but yet you can't explain it.
You can't explain it.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So let's talk about evolution for a second. Okay. So Darwin's evolution specifically. When Darwin wrote his theory of evolution, he assumed that the fossil record would show continuous and gradual changes into multiple species.
100%.
Okay. This has not been the case.
No, not at all.
This is just, like, empirically true.
The fossil record. We have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fossil records do not look like what Darwin said.
Yeah.
So when you hear somebody talking about evolution, a current scientist talking about evolution, they're probably talking about a different form of evolution
100%.
than what we think of when we think of like the Snopes trial. Or
Darwin's
Snopes trial.
Man, that idea of like, well, you could go all the way back to goo because that's technically where they went. I mean, they went so far back to goo, but just take the man from ape to whatever. Like there is no they're not philosophical. There's no scientific. Man, I've been saying philosophy so much I can't. What is the word? What is the word? What's the word for a bone?
What's the word for a bone?
Like a bone you find in the dirt. What is that called?
Fossil?
Yeah, fossil. Thank you, fossil. I couldn't.
Where are you going with this?
I can't think of the word fossil. There's no fossil evidence because I've been saying philosophical too much. I couldn't get the right out. But there's no fossil record showing this transition that goes from blank to blank to blank to blank.
Right. There is none. In fact, the Cambrian explosion shows something opposite.
Right.
Shows an immediate introduction of species into specific time periods, right?
Right.
And there are other smaller explosions that occur at different places, but there is no like gradual, okay, we talk about the missing link, right?
Right.
We can't find a missing
link.
Link.
We still have
right?
it.
In fact, I saw this great painting. Like they had somebody made a painting based off of a fossil they found on the ground, like in volcanic ash, right? And there were footprints all in it. And they were able to take these footprints and they were like, okay, so they painted like a woolly mammoth.
Right.
And then they had like a deer and an antelope and like looked very much like what we see today.
Sure.
And then they had a Neanderthal man.
Mm-hmm.
But they were like, but these footprints show that they stood upright a lot like a human did.
Right.
But we've determined they were Neanderthal because this fossil is from this time period.
Right.
Okay. So it looks like a duck. It talks like a duck. It flies like a duck, but it's a Neanderthal.
Right.
Right. And the only thing they did that with was with the human being.
100%.
Right. So like, again, this is the science of the gaps. This is the presupposition that my evidence is going to bear out. And until it does, I'm just going to believe that it does.
Well, and not only that, but I think it shows a logical fallacy too, which is the if you really read Darwin, like he's really big on natural selection. So like a lot of what he's seeing is coming from the Galapagos Islands and he's seeing these birds and these fish and turtles and all the, like with things that are unique to their specific area. And he's saying, well, clearly there must have been some survival of the fittest that happened here. And so what's interesting too, I think, about when you look at fossil records and you look at things like that, like, and I always talk about this, like if evolution in the way that Darwin explained it happened, there would be no other species. You would lose all those, especially if you get further and further and so there are no Neanderthals. Why are there no Neanderthals? But there are still chimps. There are still mice. There's you know what I mean. There's still so there's these gaps that begin to occur even in the logic of it.
There is definitely a struggle there, right?
Sure.
To kind of piece that all together. Now Darwin also held that smaller cells in older species would be less complicated,
right?
But what we find is that the DNA letter code of a simple single-cell amoeba is equivalent to 1,000 copies of the 30-volume Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
The mathematical probability of this code occurring in this specific order at random is immeasurable.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, natural selection resulting in evolution is so mathematically improbable, it is, in practical sense, impossible.
100%.
Right? A group of scientists were having this discussion. They said, so is the door open for that? Is it possible?
Right.
And one of them said, it's probable, but when we talk about its level of probability, for all intents and purposes, it's impossible.
Right.
Right. And he brought up the joke from the Simpsons about, you've heard the statement about like 1,000 chimps writing on typewriters, given enough time.
Yeah.
That they would come up with the works of Shakespeare. And you had Mr. Burns had this room with all the chimps, and he pulls out the paper and says, it was the best of times, it was the blurst of times. The blurst of times, you stupid chimp. And they were kind of joking this. They were like, basically, the friend to the evolutionists is time.
Right.
Right? The problem is there's not enough time.
Right.
Even in the old Earth models,
right.
There's not enough time to create what you claim was created through Darwinian evolution, right?
And there's no standardizing of it either, because like you said, so you can have bajillions of years and bajillions of years between, each fossil record, or even millions of years, but yet that same consistent rate doesn't happen. You know what I mean? So like, it took 2 million years from this to this.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? There's no consistency to this. We jokingly talked about 400 years. I don't know what podcast that was, a couple podcasts ago, about how God uses 400 years. There's probably more truth in what we were saying there than what's even here. You see what I'm saying as far as a consistent, measurable time frame, Well,
I mentioned in that last episode a guy, a YouTuber, Daily Dose of Wisdom. He actually was the one who put that video up that I was just referencing.
Oh, yeah.
And they were kind of discussing that. But one of the things they talk about with natural selection and mutation is that natural selection not only has to give you the most beneficial thing, it has to give it to you early.
Right.
Like when you think, again, like mathematically, the probability of a slow adaptation resulting in the survival of species doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It just doesn't. It doesn't work. And I go back to it's been a while since this book came out, so I don't know if he's revised it or not. But Richard Dawkins wrote The God Delusion.
Right.
I remember picking it up when it first came out and reading through some of his thoughts, and he was kind of railing against people who push back on him and say, like, we can't get this through random acts,
right?
Through the randomness of natural selection,
right?
And he says, but these people don't understand what natural selection is because it's not random,
right?
Okay. So if natural selection isn't random,
right?
What is its guiding principle?
Right.
Where does it what directs it?
Right.
If it's not undirected,
you're getting back into an intelligent design conversation.
Right. Now we're talking about intelligent design. But here's what Richard Dawkins says, and actually this is Dr. Stephen Meyer quoting Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins has famously stated that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose.
Right.
Okay. So I would say it is blind faith that the outcome will lead to no design that allows you to ignore what is being observed, right? So, like, if you're looking at this and you're saying, yeah, it looks like it's designed, but I know it's not.
Right.
Well, then you're no longer scientific.
Right.
Right.
You've already denied,
right,
like we said, the first tenet of science. Right.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Everything, again, it walks like a duck, it swims like a duck, it quacks like a duck.
But it's not.
Right.
It's
not. It plays cornerback for the Louisville Cardinals. I make a joke. There's a defensive back for the Louisville Cardinals this last year that's in the draft this year whose name is Storm Duck. Great name. Great name. Anyway. But if it looks like a duck, it should be a duck.
It should be, right.
Right? Not a prehistoric ancestor of said duck.
Well, and so another tenet of science is it's about like weighted. And by that I mean it's about like if there's more evidence in favor of or support of than against, you go with what the evidence supports, right? So I say that to say, like, so here's the funny thing. So when the evidence starts stacking up in the realm, so let's say your hypothesis is that, and this is a tenet of science, it again should have real science, and so this is why sometimes I look at Christians and I think our faith is a little bit better because we are sometimes willing, but when so let's go back to my theory of the man is pulling the string that's pulling this around, and that's what gravity is. As I discover more and more that my hypothesis is wrong, a good scientist is supposed to admit they were wrong. You see what I'm saying? Like that's science is rooted in the truth, not in my subjective opinion of what I want, Not to sell a book. It's to say, so there's been so many scientists who aren't famous who helped us by figuring out what things weren't. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's where I think someone like a Richard Dawkins quote comes in, is when the evidence starts to stack up against what you believe. As a scientist, you're supposed to say, I was wrong. That's the truth.
Yeah.
But that's not how it works.
It's interesting, too, when we talk about Dawkins. I don't know if you've seen some of his recent comments in the media, but he's not happy with the direction of his country.
Sure.
And he's more recently, after spending all these years saying that Christianity is bad.
Right.
He's now saying, but it's not as bad as other things.
Right.
And he says he would even go as far as to call himself culturally Christian, which that's another podcast for another time.
Right.
But that he wants and appreciates the benefits
Right.
of Christianity. Look, study and research has shown Christianity has benefited the world.
Sure.
Like 10 times over.
100%.
Right?
Even just as a society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the world that his atheism has been building, he's finding to be less desirable than the world that our theism built.
Well, when truth becomes subjective, which science is not about science claims to be about objective truth, right?
Yeah.
Our goal is to find the truth at all costs.
Yeah.
Even in spite of even in spite of wasting millions of dollars on research that didn't work. You know what I mean? Like that is that. And so I think that's what's really interesting. And that's been one of the things that I noticed too, especially like when you talk about the physics side of it. I was reading, and I can't remember his name. Gosh, I'll have to find it. I did a sermon series on this a while back, but there's a guy who is an astrophysicist, and he basically says, I'm summarizing and paraphrasing, which we know got to be careful with, but he basically says that like when it comes to the fields of science, like if you want to know about the existence of God, or like if there is a God, be an astrophysicist, because there's no way you can be in this field and not see the creation. You know what I mean? Not see intelligent design.
It's not Machaku, is it?
No, I can't think of his name, man. I'll have to think of his. But he's another one, right? Because but basically what they're saying is like we're studying things that we can see, but we can't even really test, right? Like I can math, like astrophysicist is based on physics and based on math.
Right.
But they can't test, black holes, and like they're starting to kind of be able to grasp them. But like, so a lot of what they're going off of is just math, which is the most basic science possible. And they're saying, look, on a math level, let me just tell you, this is,
Well, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Math isn't even, I don't know that I would classify math as science.
Not anymore. No.
Right. And also, this is something that I've heard recently that I found really fascinating is mathematicians understand that math is not something they do, it's something they discover.
Right.
Which is to say that it is in existence
already.
Like 2 + 2 is always 4.
Right.
Right? Like, and it exists in a consciousness. It exists in a realm, right?
Right.
That is outside of natural science.
Right.
Like, so therefore you really can't prove math with natural science.
Right.
And so then the question becomes, well, if math already exists,
right,
how?
Right.
And why?
Right.
And if it's in the consciousness, then whose consciousness is it in before it enters ours?
Which just to deepen that, a guy named Immanuel Kant has this whole argument for a priori and a posteriori knowledge.
Yeah.
And so meaning basically he says there are things, that we just know how to do, like breathe, but you tease that out even further, you begin to see that there are things that exist even without us being aware of their existence.
Yeah.
And so like, and again, that used to be science. You know what I mean? Like that was a tenet. Like that's what science. And I love how we just keep calling it science. But like that was
natural science.
The idea of science as a whole, the study of the natural world, operated on this idea of discovery rather than like the experiment was for the discovery, not the experiment. You know what I mean? Like I think there's something that's moved and shaped in that. But again, this is where the gaps and the faith of a scientist come in, right? Because as evidence begins to stack against, as things begin to happen, you begin to get these quotes like Dawkins saying, it probably is God, but
right.
Like that's not science. That's stupid.
Right. But now we're in an age where it's fashionable to deem yourself intelligent,
right,
and to follow somebody like Dawkins because you think that they're intelligent,
right,
and so now you want to appear as intelligent, so you regurgitate what he says, and you end up with things like this example I gave, I think, in our last podcast, the guy saying to the street preacher,
right,
prove to me that Jesus existed, in history, and he said, well, first prove to me that Napoleon existed, right. There are things that science doesn't prove. So when people talk about having scientific evidence or having scientific proof, again, they're talking about natural science.
Right.
You don't prove things through natural science.
Right.
You don't prove everything through natural science.
Right.
You prove a small quantity of things through natural science, right? So you can't prove philosophy through science. You can't prove history through natural science.
Right.
You can't prove language. You know, like the major language arts, right? Like math,
linguistics,
language arts,
you can't
social
do any
studies.
Of that. Yeah.
You can't do any of those things, right? Math, psychology, art, music, morality,
right,
theology. You don't prove these things through natural science.
Right.
You know, you can have elements of natural science that corroborate things within those categories.
Sure.
But they are separate categories. And we have to recognize that they are as equally valid and important as the natural science.
Right. Well, and think about when it comes to natural science to prove things, what do they rely on? Things like history.
Yes.
Things like math. I mean, look at Einstein. Like, I mean, his whole theory of relativity was E equals mc squared. That's an equation. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, look at physics. It's an equation. Like these, like they're using math. You know, the math that I hate. That's not numbers, but letters. You know, but they're using these things to create a constant, to create to prove that. So it's funny. Like for us to observe the natural world, we have to use things outside of the natural world. You know, which is problematic when suddenly you say, "Well, there's nothing outside the natural world."
Right. Exactly. And as we've kind of talked about already, you have to have a lot of presuppositions.
Right.
Right. And like we've already discussed, natural science, these types of natural sciences, one are presuppose there is no supernatural or that the supernatural is not beneficial or a valid answer.
Right.
Right. But here's some things that you have to first do to practice natural science.
Right.
First, you have to believe that there is such a thing as truth. We've already kind of touched on that.
Right.
You have to believe that there is truth.
Right.
Right. An absolute truth about specific topics.
Which is why science is wishy-washy today. Because for centuries, you know, and I'm not trying to get into this debate right now, but like for centuries, man was man and woman was woman. You know, like, and so, but now the ambiguity has seeped in, and now science is like, well, and like you have a person like Neil, who's scientific through and through, smarter than I'll probably ever be, saying, yeah, but those terms can change. Oh, but your terms can't change. You see what I'm saying? Like now it's rules for thee, but not for me. You know? Yeah.
Exactly. You also have to believe that truth is understandable, right? And I think this is going back to Neil deGrasse Tyson in this particular set. Like he kind of appeals to an ignorance,
for sure.
You know, and it's also like if you've ever heard Bill Nye talk about abortion,
right? He
doesn't appeal to science,
right?
He appeals to believing the mother,
right? Sure.
Trusting her to make a good decision,
right?
He doesn't look at science.
Right.
Why? 100%. Because it would be unpopular opinion
to see what the science says.
To talk about that.
Right. Which, by the way, is probably going to be talking about statistics, which is the study of math. You know, so again, you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Exactly. So then you also have to believe that understanding truth is a good thing.
Right.
Right. So it has to be desirable.
It's good you're wrong. Right. It's you want to be like in science that you should want to be wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's a good thing and you want to be right, but still, it's a good thing to be wrong, to know the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But if astrophysics doesn't lead to something that's good, what's the point?
Right. 100%.
You have to first believe that it leads to something good, right?
Right.
Well, then that leaves you with another conundrum because you have to believe that there is such a thing as goodness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which again, you can't prove that something's good with science.
Right.
Right. You have to be able to imagine that the world is comprehensible to our intellect.
Right.
Right. That's a science. You have to be able to do that to practice science. You have to believe that exploring the natural world will be beneficial.
Right.
Right. These are all metaphysical claims required just to begin practicing science. And the one right there near the end, imagine that the world is comprehensible to our intellect. This is why science really came out of theism.
Right.
Came out of Christianity, came out of a belief in God.
Right.
Because there was belief that there was a creator, B, that we were created in his image.
Right.
Which C meant that we had some capacity of his intellect.
Right, 100%.
Right? Like not that we could see things the way God sees things, but we must have some level of understanding to be, if we're like him in any way, we must be able to grasp something.
That's why science, like you said, that science started to understand God.
Right.
Like it was, and if you know, and I know we're going to talk about this, but like for centuries, scientists were Christian.
Yeah.
Like they had this firm belief in, I mean, I'll say theists, like, you know, but they're probably Christian because most of the world was Christian at that point. But like they had this theistic deep belief that like God was real and like God permeated things. And I mean, like you know, I've shared my story multiple times. I'm like a byproduct of that because like for me, what brought me back into faith was Aquinas' proofs of the existence of God, which is a very scientific argument that argues, it becomes the God of the gaps, but it argues this idea of like, if you continue to ask the why, like you said, I think you're right. I think we've started asking the wrong question, which is how, because even when you ask how, you have to ask, well, how did that happen? How did that happen? And why did, when you start to, but if you ask enough questions, Aquinas says like, look, you're going to get back to an author, an intelligent creator, and I think that that's what's really interesting too about history is up until a certain point, that was a completely permissible thing. And I actually, my kid asked me the other day, Landry, my son, he said, are any scientists Christian? I said, yeah. I said, I think there's a lot of them. I said, I think some of the best ones are actually Christian because they are the ones who are open to not only just being wrong, but they're open to the idea of anything is on the table.
Yeah.
I am, not going to limit what my observation sees, right? I'm not going to trust my, I think it's funny too, like statistically speaking, like when you look at witness accounts, you can't always trust witness accounts because your eyes, isn't that Bible? Like, I mean, doesn't the Bible talk about our eyes deceiving us and think, like there's so many
about our hearts deceiving us.
Hearts. I mean, that's what I'm saying. So like, there's so many things that the Bible talks about that like science is just now catching up to.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
No, I think that's good. And as you were talking about that, I was reminded of this story, as we kind of talk about the how and the why. And right. I think I've shared this story before of John Lennox talking about asking questions about, I wanted a cup of tea. So I put the tea kettle on and boiled the water. He asked his friend, so why is the water boiling?
Right.
And he's like, well, because the heat does this and conducts through this, and then the water does this, and this is this.
Right.
And he says, you've missed the point. No, the reason the water is boiling is because I wanted tea.
Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
You've missed the why.
Right.
You only cared about the how.
Right.
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 And purpose is incredibly important.
So important. Right.
So then as we were discussing this just now, what we're kind of saying is that faith really leads to science.
I think so.
Right. So our understanding of who God is led us to want to understand how he did things.
Yes.
Right. So let me read this. So this is from John Bloom. He's a PhD professor of physics at Biola University. He's their chair of chemistry, physics, and engineering department. And this is from an article called Science and Faith that was posted in, I think, 2016.
So this is the physics. We're finally into the physics.
Finally get to the physics.
Faith. Yes, here we go.
So this is what Bloom said. He said, instead of finding a perpetual battle waging between science and faith, historians and philosophers observe a much more collegial relationship. The Christian worldview laid the foundation for modern science by seeing the world as impersonal material rather than embodied gods, which is governed by fixed laws rather than the whims of a committee of squabbling gods that are intelligible to us because we are made in the Creator's image. Thus, we have some ability to think God's thoughts after him. Unfortunately, the Enlightenment movement began pushing this theistic view aside, arguing that matter and physical laws alone are sufficient to explain everything, and so God was unnecessary baggage. Right? So again, we're seeing that what instigated science was a belief in God.
Which, isn't it funny how, I mean, just look at that from an atheistic perspective. What he says is, if it wasn't for Christianity, you'd still be believing that Zeus is shooting lightning bolts down because he's mad at Hades. You know what I mean? That could be completely like Christianity said, no, there's one God, and there's a very logical explanation for lightning, and it actually has nothing to do necessarily with God shooting lightning bolts down from this. It's not squabbling gods. It's the way God ordered the world. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Like, exactly. So suddenly Christianity has introduced order, which is biblical, and it's introduced one God, which is also biblical. So the atheist is kind of already in a bad place now, right? Because if it wasn't for us,
you've left the foundations.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, let me give you another quote. Noah J. Ephron, he's a professor at Bar Ilan University, where he was the founding chair of the Interdisciplinary Program of Science, Technology, and Society.
Sounds very fancy.
Yeah, yes. Very fancy. So Ephron said, today almost all historians agree that Christianity, Catholicism as well as Protestantism, moved many early modern intellectuals to study nature systematically. Historians have also found that notions borrowed from Christian belief found their ways into scientific discourse with glorious results. right? So give you a few more examples here. Here's some scientists who were Christian: Newton, Faraday, Kelvin, Maxwell, Boyle, Pascal, Pasteur, Kepler, and Galileo. There's just 9 right there, right? Who have built
pretty big names. By the way.
Pretty big names in the scientific community.
It wasn't like John Schmo, and you're like, who's John Schmo? You knew all of those names,
right? Exactly. It's not like Bill Kodak who made film. You know what I mean? Like, that's not.
Hey, poor Bill. Bill's probably like, hey, come on, man.
Look, hey, I did that for the glory of God.
Let's make a comeback, man.
Yeah. All right. Galileo once stated, the intention of the Holy Spirit is to teach us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go.
Right.
Right. Which again, the why versus the how.
Exactly.
How did God do this? Okay.
Love it.
Got another long quote here.
That's a good one. I'm like it. These are all people who aren't us, who are way smarter than us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's Stephen C. Meyer, who, this is his article on how Christianity gave rise to modern science. Stephen C. Meyer says, the first thing to say is that science did not arise because of a set of naturalistic presuppositions. It actually arose because of a conviction that there was a lawful order in nature, that human beings could discern and understand it because they'd been made in the image of the creator of that order, and that also they needed to go investigate. While they might expect that there's a rational order there, so the Greeks believed the same, they also knew the rational order was contingent on the choice of the creator. This was a product of recovering the doctrine of creation in the late Middle Ages. Since the order in nature is contingent on the act of the creator, we have to go and look and see what kind of order he put into it. We can't just simply sit in our armchairs and deduce it from logical first principles.
Right.
The Greeks and Ptolemaic astronomy were a good example of this. They figured that since the most perfect form of motion is a circle, and since the planets are in a heavenly realm, they must be inscribing circular orbits. But in fact, they were doing ellipses. Right. So the early modern scientists broke with the ancient Greeks and said, since nature is created by God and he could have done otherwise, we need to go and find out not what he must have done, as Robert Boyle said, but what he did do, which means empirical investigation. Yeah. You've got to look and see.
Right.
I really love how he kind of finishes that with this thing. We could say this is how things are because we can observe that these are the best things.
Right.
No, you need to go determine why God did what God did.
Right.
And that will help you understand why God did.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Right. So anyone who pits science and faith against each other, which is also known as the conflict model, anyone who pushes the conflict model, they're really pushing a revisionist history.
For sure.
Right? They're really doing that because they only want to disparage faith.
Well, they're doing the disservice of science, which is everything that their work is built on the grounds of those scientists.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like so it's suddenly like it's funny, like in religious circles, Aquinas, Kant, some of these guys are really, Augustine, heavy hitters in the philosophical religious world.
Yeah.
Heavy hitters in the secular world too, to a certain point. You see what I mean? Like and then all of a sudden, suddenly they're no longer. Every classical philosophical class you take, whether it's at a Christian university or state-run university, or even probably, I would even say, if there was such thing as a satanic university, like you would read them because everything is built on those guys' arguments.
Yeah. And
then up to a certain point, all of a sudden, and it happens again, Enlightenment time, it actually really begins to happen a lot with like nihilism and all, like kind of that 20th century, 19th century turn. All of a sudden, all these people think, "Oh, we've got all the answers. We don't need these people anymore." So now, all of those arguments that you just built all of your reason and logic off of, no longer you no longer, but you still use them, right? So that's what I'm saying. So science still uses faith to prove itself, but it doesn't want to admit it. You see what I'm saying? Like,
exactly. Yeah, we don't want to tell you what we built this house on.
Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. The bones are good, but don't look.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So what about scriptures that encourage science?
Yes.
Like, does God encourage us to perform science?
I said this when I did a sermon series, that science is just now catching up to the thing that God said thousands of years ago.
Yeah. So Matthew 22, 37 through 38 says, "And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Mm-hmm. This is the great and foremost commandment." Mm-hmm. This is an encouragement to study what God did, to use your mind and intellect and reason to look at what is around you, to make observations and determine how things work.
He constantly is saying, test the spirits, test what you hear. Like God is a God of, I mean, he gave us these minds to even conceive scientific method. He's the author of it, if you want to be real, like if you really want to break it down. Yeah,
absolutely. How about Proverbs 2, 1 through 6? "Make your ear attentive to wisdom, incline your heart to understanding. For if you cry out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God, for the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding." I think because scriptures like this talk about God and the Lord and the fear of God, we often think of these in a spiritual context.
Right.
But it's greater than that.
Sure. Wisdom, understanding, discernment. I mean, these are all physical properties we use here.
Yeah.
Right now.
Exactly. So you should seek understanding.
And it's been ingrained in us. I think that's the funny thing too about science is why do you care to study the world?
Yeah.
What's your let's bring it to a very philosophical argument of beauty. Why is the sunset beautiful? Why do we find it? There is no scientific. You can go from your brain chemistry, sure, mm-hmm. but that's still not answering the science of why it's beautiful.
Well, you can talk about brain chemistry all you want.
Right.
I think the problem is you can't prove or trust that your brain chemistry is giving you something intelligible.
And why is that defined as beauty?
Right. If there is no designer.
100%. Right. How can you have a desire for truth if that truth wasn't implanted in you? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's the longing that I think the conflict that even atheist feels is they want truth. They want to because they want to be right. But when the truth that they discover, which is the truth, doesn't match up with what they want to be right, they abandon the truth for the sake of what they, and that's again, science is falling into that same trap.
Yeah. Okay. So 1 Timothy 6, 20 through 21. "Timothy, protect what has been entrusted to you, avoiding worldly empty chatter and the opposing arguments of what is falsely called knowledge."
In quotes.
which some have professed and thereby have gone astray from the faith.
Right.
So again, here's an admonition for Timothy to ground himself in truth and knowledge, and
there are conflicting.
Yeah,
there are things out there that were try to discredit the truth.
Right, exactly. God has told us since the beginning to be curious and to go out and discover, to take dominion over the earth, even
100%. Right.
And I think this all falls into that category.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, it's funny because a lot of modern natural science has really turned into care science, care of creation, care of the earth, things of that. And like I said, God's been saying that since what's the first thing he tells us as humans to do? That's what we were charged to do in the garden was okay. Yeah. So it's funny, it's just you look at things that science is, we should really care about our environment. You're right. We should. But we know that.
Yeah, and it's funny. They don't mind quoting the Bible on that when they want us to sign up for some political activism.
Right.
Because they're trying to convince us.
Right. Why we should care.
But they don't believe that.
No.
If you don't believe that the Bible is true, then why should I care about that?
Right. 100%.
Right. So speaking on that, the Bible being true, and the Bible actually discussing scientific principles before they became scientific principles.
They were on the cutting edge, buddy.
Let's just hit a few of these. Isaiah 40:22 says, "He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth."
Right.
The earth is a globe.
Right.
Okay. Why do we always get like this bad rap of being flat earthers?
Right. I don't know.
The Bible tells us that it's not flat.
I do not know. Even Job talks about it being a globe.
Well, Job 26:7, he suspends the earth over nothing.
Right.
Right? We are adrift in space.
Right.
We're not on the back of a turtle.
Right.
Or an elephant or whatever it is, right?
Those are some cool myths, but yeah.
But we hang in space, which is truth, right?
Right.
How about 26:8? We go one more verse. He wraps up the waters in his clouds, yet the clouds do not burst under their weight.
Right.
So there's this observation of how rain clouds work. This is discussed again and in more detail in Job 37:27 through 28 that talks about the rain cycles.
Right.
Right. Genesis.
Which, by the way, Job is... Well, and you're about to read a Genesis. Job is probably one of the oldest books in the Bible.
Yeah.
So let's just put that in perspective. Like God's starting off with these. You know what I mean? Like he's leading with some science.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he really led off with Genesis 1:1, which is in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
This is the Bible saying that the earth had a beginning, that the universe had a beginning.
Had a beginning, 100%.
Right. I'm old enough to remember when the Big Bang was supposed to be a refutation of Christianity.
Right.
It never was.
No.
It was an evidence of Christianity.
Well, I use that. It talks about what's the first thing created? Light. Do you know what travels faster than the speed of sound? It's faster than anything. Is light.
Is light.
So what they've actually just recently discovered, probably within the last, I'd say, decade and a half, is that Big Bang Theory, according to, if it's, again, we're still working in theories, which is funny. Science is saying it's a theory. God has already said, no, it already happened. But the theory is that there was this explosion.
Yeah.
Well, what would have been the first thing seen in said explosion? Light. God said that off the bat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just read your Bible, scientist, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah.
And
we're not even getting into the idea of what set off said explosion.
100%.
Something can't come from nothing.
100%.
Right.
Nothing in according to the laws of physics. Man, I can't talk between fossils and philosophy and physics. But according to the laws of physics, nothing not in motion can suddenly burst into motion.
Right.
Something has to start that motion.
There has to be a catalyst.
Right. There has to be.
Right.
And that's science. I'm using science here. Like physics. Like I'm not just saying like this is something. So these are their own rules.
Yeah.
So we have to look at those rules and say, what is that? What creates the bang? What creates the molecules that start said bang, that move them? There's so many. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Ecclesiastes 1:7 says, all the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. This is a concept of a water cycle before science proved it.
Right.
How about Psalm 102, 25 through 26? In time of old you founded the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. Even they will perish, but you endure. All of them will wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will pass away. This is entropy in the second law of thermodynamics.
Isn't that crazy?
Right? And so these are just some of the examples. There are more. I found like some lists, just kind of doing some research.
Yeah.
Some of them felt like a stretch, if I'm being honest.
Sure.
And so like, I'm not going to say that some people don't stretch some of this stuff, but the evidence is there.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Like what we understand as science, these principles, there was somebody who put them into place.
Right.
I think in the future, you and I are going to discuss a little bit more about that and talk a little bit about things like the fine tuning argument and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like there is a reasonable, probable scientific explanation for everything.
Everything, sure.
And that leads to the idea that God created everything.
Right.
So
intelligent design, before we even get into the fine tuning, intelligent design, just based on that alone, I mean, that evidence that these things are being said, biblically said, thousands of years before anybody is even, I wish I would have been the person that could have put two and two together and been like, oh, the Bible says this, let me test it. And then, because I could be famous. You know what I mean? Like I could be the guy who developed the water cycle.
Oh, you are famous.
I know. Thanks, man. In my own mind. But that's what I'm saying is like that's how amazing our God is. Is like he was saying these things before we even thought to even think them.
Do you think that somewhere along the line our ideas as people shifted from the importance of the why to the to the how, because if we could explain how, we didn't necessarily need to care about the why. Like, we wanted to eliminate God from this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think somewhere along the way, the study of the how became more about the what. What do I want? What do I want? What do I want to achieve? Like, what is, science? The hypothesis became more important than the actual result. You see what I'm saying? Like, and I think that's what has shifted is now we're using hows to explain what we want, but we're not even like I said, like just things that science has held for centuries, and suddenly now it's just well, that's not what it means. And you're like, well, that completely, and these aren't little things. These are things that completely redefine words, redefine everything, and ambiguity. And I'll tell you right now, science is not about ambiguity.
No.
No. Trust me, I've got the grades to prove it.
It's not the He Gets Us campaign, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So I think that's really what's happened is the what has become more important than even the how and the why. This is what I want to do. So I'm going to show you how I can do it. Yeah. It's almost in a lot of ways, like in a weird, strange way, it's almost become like, we talked about this a couple podcasts ago about the 10 Commandments. It's almost like how Moses creates the sign, like throws his staff down, and then what happens? Pharaoh doesn't want to let him go, so he tells his guys to go out and do the same thing.
Yeah.
There's going to be a point, though, and I think it already has happened, and I think it's happening, but there's going to be a point, though, where they will not be able to replicate the miracles of God.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, I think it's already happened because there's so many things out there that, and that's either where their heart gets hardened and they just are completely, and I think that's where we're at. Like, our hearts are so hard that we do not want to admit the truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it's gotten. And I think why this matters to us today, and I'm not trying to be this world is ending kind of person, but what I am saying is we live in a world that does not understand the magnitude of God.
Yeah.
And I think that our what we've been talking about today, and kind of our argument, quote, for lack of a better word, today, has really been about the fact that, like, God was and will always be.
Yeah. And
even as the world continues to tell us how dumb that is, that's not the truth. And, like, that's all we want to be about as Christians, and no, just you and me personally, is about truth. And I'm sure that there's going to be some comments at some point in some of these, and maybe in some of the ones in the future, that are going to raise some really good questions and maybe even refute some of the things that we say. And I want to say, like, let's talk. Like, let's continue. Like, I would encourage that. I am not a scientist.
Yeah.
But I do have, like, some resources, and I do have some things that maybe we can talk through some more. But I say all that to say, like, that's what science is supposed to be.
You make a great point, though. Like, I'm not a scientist. I just play one on TV. Right. I'm not a scientist, but Frank Turek has a statement that he's made multiple times. He's like, you don't trust the science, you trust the scientist.
Right.
Science doesn't tell you anything. Scientists tell you
100%.
Right? So if it's not accessible to me as a non-scientist, like, we talk about this too, like, with theology, right?
Right.
Like, there are theologians and then there are people.
Right.
Theology is accessible to people.
Right.
Theologians maybe sometimes have a better understanding of it, but it also puts you in a unique position to bend it to
for sure,
to what you wanted to say.
For sure.
Right. And to say that scientists don't fall in that same camp, or don't, most people who say they trust science don't know how to do a first lick of science.
Oh, right. Like, there's an old joke by Nate Bargatze. He talks about, like, when you become a scientist, the first thing you must do is talk about beetles, because, like, he makes this argument, like, they used to say beetles were 6 billion years old or 6 million years old, and then they just found out that they were like 4 million, and he's like, and no one lost their job. He's like, you were off 2 million years and no one lost their job. And he's like, that must be like what you do. Like, and he makes this joke. He's like, scientists are probably just back in the back, like, oh yeah, just go tell them it's 6. They don't know how to figure it out. We don't even know how to figure it out. Just go tell, and I think that there is some, I know he's joking, but I do think there is some kind of a truth in that, is like, there are complexities that even a scientist, like, I recently talked to a doctor, or watched a doctor rather talking, and he was talking about medicine. He was talking about how some medicines have these effects and they have no idea why.
Yeah.
And literally he was like, we don't know why it happens this way, but it does. That's an even better like explanation than, like, we don't understand this, we're going to try, like, I don't know. Is it even better to answer than a lie? You see what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
Like, and I think that's where we're at is like, we both want nothing but the truth and nothing but what is real, right? What is, and so that's why I think this is where this conversation kind of shifts into the next phases as we go. Is our job isn't to be scientists. Our job is just to figure out what is truth.
Yeah.
Who to trust and to be open. Yeah, to be open to it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want the truth. I think we can handle the truth.
We can.
Yeah. But the one thing I don't know if we can handle is these
drums. I was going to say the drums. I was going to say these drums for sure.
We want these drums. Yeah. But I don't know if we can handle
there's some truth in there if we just listen. There is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoy the drums, and I hope that you found this an uplifting episode. Yeah.